I do fear for the future of Britain if the crazy woke left take over. And conservatives, they really have to stand up for conservative principles, fight for conservative values, policies. Otherwise, they're going to lose.
How's it going? My name is Jess and this is Reasoned. Today I'm honoured to be joined with Nile Gardiner, who was a former aide to Margaret Thatcher. We will be discussing Joe Biden's recent trip to Northern Ireland and also whether woke culture has a part to play with high taxes, as Liz Truss has recently said. President of the United States, Joe Biden, has arrived in Northern Ireland for a trip. What has his journey been like so far? What's the reaction been? And what's the significance of it?
Well, thank you for having me on the show today. And I think overall, Joe Biden's visit to Ireland, also Northern Ireland, is a reflection of the fact that Biden, in many respects, is a declining figure on the international stage. I mean, he may be popular in Ireland, but in the United States, I mean, he is a deeply unpopular president. And also in the United Kingdom, I think that Biden is viewed increasingly as very anti-British. And he spent a very short time actually in Northern Ireland and then far longer in Ireland. Clearly, Biden has little time for the United Kingdom. He is somebody who is obsessed, I think, with Irish issues. He is also a big supporter of the European Union. He's very anti-Brexit. I don't think that Joe Biden is any friend of the United Kingdom. In fact, he started off his presidency by removing a bust of Winston Churchill from the Oval Office, just as Barack Obama did as well when he was president. Donald Trump brought the bust of Churchill back into the Oval Office, but Biden decided to throw it out on day one. So that was an early indication of the shape of things to come with regard to Joe Biden. But I do view him as an extraordinarily weak-kneed leader on the world stage. He is somebody who increasingly sounds incoherent, often out of his mind, frankly, when he takes to the podium. And he may have received a lot of applause in Ireland, but the reality is, on the world stage, he is viewed as, I think, an increasingly poor representative of the United States, and he's viewed as very weak by America's adversaries, from Beijing to Moscow to Tehran. And so I don't really think that you could describe Joe Biden as the leader of the free world, frankly. And I do think he's an embarrassment to the United States on so many levels, and he has treated the UK with a great deal of contempt and with a very rude approach.
So, how has the UK reacted to this? Like, what's Rishi Sunak's response been? And do you think it's been the right response? Do you think we've taken a strong approach towards Biden's, what's the word? Like, his, not hostility, but his negative attitude towards us?
Well, I think Joe Biden's been very rude, actually, towards the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, lecturing him over the Brexit deal, over the Windsor framework, and basically demanding that Sunak bring the DUP on board. Now, this is a matter for the British people. It's none of Joe Biden's business to be lecturing the United Kingdom and its government with regard to policy over Northern Ireland and Brexit. So I have to say that Joe Biden's intervention here is absolutely out of order. Um, at the same time, I think that Sunak is keen to avoid any kind of confrontation with Biden. Rishi Sunak has not projected, I think, the kind of strength that should be demonstrated here when dealing with the U.S. President, and Sunak should tell Biden to mind his own business. And it's no place for the U.S. President to be making demands of the British government. And what happens with the Windsor Framework and whether or not the DUP decide to sign on, this is nothing at all to do with the White House, and this is a British political issue. It's with regard to the future of Northern Ireland. It's my own view. I think that the Windsor Framework is highly flawed, and I think with good reason the DUP have opposed it, and also many British Conservative MPs have opposed the deal as well, including Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. So, with good reason, I think the DUP are not going along with this deal. But it's no place of the U.S. president to be telling a British Prime Minister what should be done here. And Joe Biden is rude, he's arrogant, and he thinks he can do whatever he wants in the United Kingdom, and clearly he has no right to do so. And his views on this, frankly, are his own personal views, and the British government should do whatever is in the best interest of the United Kingdom with regard to Northern Ireland and the future of Brexit.
We saw with Donald Trump there was quite a pushback from the UK. Do you remember that big float of Donald Trump? I think it was like a baby or something. It was insane. But there was such a pushback because of Trump, because people disagreed with the language that he used. But to me personally, Biden is, if not more sloppy and more dangerous with his language when it comes to stuff like this. Like the comment about the black and tans recently, I think that was out of order. What do you think about that? What do you think about his language?
Well, Biden is clearly, I think, incapable of delivering a coherent press conference these days, and I think his own aides and advisors are terrified whenever he goes to the podium because Joe Biden makes all sorts of gaffes. He is the most gaffe-prone U.S. president, certainly of the modern era, I think. And you never know what he's going to say, and he says a lot of stupid stuff. I think a great deal of the time, and so and his trip to Ireland is no different, where his statements have been riddled with all sorts of embarrassing gaffes. And the reality is, I think Joe Biden is an embarrassment to the United States and to the free world, and so many levels. You mentioned Donald Trump earlier. Certainly, there was a lot of opposition to Trump in the United Kingdom, but at the end of the day, Trump was a very firm ally of the UK. He believed in the special relationship. He was a very strong supporter of Brexit. He remains so today. And you could always rely on Donald Trump to be a friend of the United Kingdom. You can't rely on Joe Biden. Biden doesn't believe in the special relationship. He treats Britain with contempt. And so I do think you have to distinguish between Biden's approach and that of Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump was a friend of Britain. Joe Biden's not.
Why don't you think the British people seem like that?
With regard to Donald Trump,
Yeah, and with Biden as well, because I think there's still a pro-Biden sentiment around. What's your opinion on the next U.S. presidential election? Do you think Biden will have a good chance of winning that? And how do you think Biden is actually seen on the world stage by the average person? Because even though there was a lot of pushback against Donald Trump, I still think there was a lot of support. But there isn't that pushback against Joe Biden despite this. Why do you think there's different attitudes with this?
well, I think British opinion over Biden, public opinion, is clearly mixed, as it was with regard to Trump. And But if you look at most of the British press coverage, I think of the Biden visit. If you look at the big British papers from the Telegraph through to the Mail, Express, the Sun, and so on, overwhelmingly negative coverage of Biden. I do think the British media, certainly the conservative media, take a very dim view of Joe Biden, and I would think that most British conservatives view Biden very negatively. And I've spoken to many conservative MPs in the UK who view Joe Biden as absolute disaster. For example, Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan was catastrophically bad and completely undermined the United Kingdom. And so I do think Biden is increasingly viewed in the United Kingdom as very, very unhelpful, even as dangerous in many respects, with aspects of his anti-British policy. His approach on Afghanistan was absolutely catastrophic in so many respects and fundamentally undermined the UK. So I think public opinion in Britain is mixed over Biden as it was over Trump. But it's striking that there is a great deal more negative coverage of Joe Biden now in the British media compared to uh, a year ago, for example. And I think that many British political commentators, members of Parliament, etc., fully understand that Joe Biden is a disaster for the free world. He is no friend of the United Kingdom, and within the United States, his opinion poll ratings are very, very low. He's one of the most unpopular U.S. presidents of modern times, and he is viewed as somebody who is adopting a very far left agenda, from his big government economic policies through to his open borders approach with regard to immigration. And so Biden is in many ways the sort of willing hostage of the far left of the Democratic Party. And public opinion in the United States has dramatically moved against Joe Biden. And I do think that Biden's track record as U.S. president has been nothing short of a complete and utter disaster.
How do you think Rishi Sunak's been doing since he's become Prime Minister? Because at first I thought he'd be more like Joe Biden, in the sense he'd be more like globalist, for like, obviously we've seen with the high taxes that he's, striving towards that. But with some things, it seems like he's given more red meat to the Conservative Party base, whether that be answering, responding to the grooming gang situation, or his stance on asylum seekers. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think that Rishi Sunak is not a particularly ideological prime minister. I mean, I don't think he's driven by any clear ideological thinking. I would not describe him as a Thatcherite politician. Big contrast with both Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, who clearly are Thatcherites. I mean, Sunak is not. I do think that Sunak has moved to the right in full recognition of the fact that unless the Conservative Party starts to advance real conservative policies, they have no chance of winning the next election. So I think that Sunak is recognizing the reality. He is shifting rightwards on issues such as immigration, dealing with the small boats crisis, but also on the cultural issues, on the transgender issue. Sunak has adopted a strong conservative line on this, and I think it's good that the British government is moving in this direction, but it still remains a long way behind the Labour Party in the polls. And I think the idea of raising taxes, which Sunak and his advisors are advancing, this is a fundamentally dangerous approach for the United Kingdom. And no Conservative government should raise taxes. A Conservative government should be cutting taxes and advancing economic freedom. And I don't think that's the approach of Rishi Sunak. And unless the Conservatives are willing to do this, to reduce the size of the state, to cut government spending, to cut taxes, they're not going to win the election. Also, they've got to really deal very seriously with the immigration, the illegal migration crisis, the small boats crisis, and unless they're going to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, they're not going to be able to achieve this. This is a reality. So there's a lot of tough talk coming from the government. I think that the messaging is, a lot of it's very good, but at the end of the day, if you're going to allow European courts to maintain dominance over British law, you can't keep Britain's borders secure. It's as simple as that. And so Sunak has to wake up on this on the ECHR issue, and you cannot protect Britain, defend Britain's borders, as long as European courts hold sway over the United Kingdom, which is absolutely outrageous. So I think overall the approach of the Sunak government is mixed. He could be doing a lot better on several fronts, especially on the economic issues, but I have to say there's a fundamentally different overall approach between Sunak and say Liz Truss, who was here in Washington this week. I think that Liz Truss's approach, a pro growth approach, tax cutting approach, economic freedom approach, that's the right way forward for Britain. And I don't think that Sunak really is prepared at the moment to implement the kind of Thatcherite policies that are needed in order to really boost the British economy and ensure that the UK is a high growth economy, advancing economic freedom at home and abroad. So I think a lot needs to be done in terms of how the British government approaches economic matters and some other issues as well.
Why do you think that Liz Truss's pro-growth agenda was basically ignored and dismissed? And how do you think, as Thatcherites, as free marketeers, for people who want low taxes, how do you think we can successfully push this message? Because from the left or the right, it seems that the country is heading towards more statism, higher taxes, and more nanny state as well. How do you
Yeah,
think we can combat that?
well, that's a great question because if you have a Conservative Party that's not willing to stand for Conservative principles, Conservative voters are not going to back it in a general election. They're going to stay at home, or they're going to vote for alternative parties like Reform, for example. And so I do think that there is a battle for the heart and soul, I think, of conservatism in the United Kingdom. I think the grassroots of the Conservative Party are very pro-free market, very much in favour of tax cutting and limited government. Unfortunately, within the Parliamentary Party, I think there are a large number of Conservative MPs who do not believe in free market or strong free market policies and are willing to buy into the kind of democratic socialism of the Labour Party, really. And so the Conservatives have to really decide as a party whether or not they're willing to stand for Thatcherism, whether they're willing to stand for cutting taxes and advancing economic growth, or whether they're just going to surrender to left-wing dogma. And I think there's a real fight within the Conservative Party, and the grassroots supporters of the Conservative Party clearly are overwhelmingly Thatcherites, actually. And so there's a disconnect, I think, between the party's supporters who are doing a lot of the work at the ground level, and the leadership of the Conservative Party right now. So this is a big ideological battle taking place within the Conservative Party itself, the oldest, most successful political party in history. But if the Conservatives lose to Labour next year, and the polls suggest they will lose unless there is a dramatic change of fortune. If they lose, we are going to see Britain being ruled by a far left socialist government that could quite possibly destroy Brexit as well. This could end up in the end of the United Kingdom if Labour decides to work together with the SNP. And I do fear for the future of Britain if the socialists get in. And Keir Starmer, I think, is an absolutely useless leader, and he would just be a complete hostage to the extreme left wing of the Labour Party. And you cannot trust anything that Keir Starmer says. I mean, he's a complete and utter flip flopper. When he says he's going to, ensure that Brexit is implemented and so on, you can't believe anything he says. So the stakes are incredibly high here, and the Conservatives are not going to win unless they implement Conservative policies and also fundamentally deal effectively with the immigration, the illegal migration crisis, and unless they control the small boats invasion, they are, I think, heading for defeat. And you cannot deal with this migration crisis until you send the message to Europe that Britain is a truly sovereign nation, and European courts and laws should have no sway over the United Kingdom, the decisions of the British government. So a great deal at stake here. But I do fear for the future of Britain if the crazy woke left take over, and conservatives, they really have to stand up for conservative principles, fight for conservative values, policies. Otherwise, they're going to lose.
Yeah, it's been said for quite a while now, since when I was young, like, is the Conservative Party conservative? and many have gathered the answer is no. A part of that is fighting wokeism, woke culture, but it seems to me that this attempt, whether it be Liz Truss, the ITV reported that Liz Truss is expected to blame woke culture for the high tax economy, or even Rishi Sunak suddenly doubling down on fighting trans ideology, it seems very forced and almost fake. It was only like a year ago when Rishi Sunak couldn't define what a woman was on Julie Hartley Brewer's show, and Liz Truss was a Liberal Democrat. I don't know whether they have true conservative values or not, and I don't know if that's going to be enough to appeal to voters. What do you think about that?
Well, first on the point of Liz Truss, and I hosted Liz here in Washington for a major speech just a couple of days ago. And you pointed out that Liz Truss was formerly a Liberal Democrat, of course, many years ago. And she switched to the Conservatives. I believe she is a very strong Thatcherite conservative politician of tremendous principle. And I think that had she remained as Prime Minister for far longer, I think that she would have been a very successful a prime minister, actually. And you had all sorts of, I would say, vested establishment interests who didn't want her as prime minister. And I think that her policies were absolutely right. She was a tax cutting politician, somebody who believed in strong economic growth based upon economic freedom. She also stood up to the woke left on cultural issues, which is absolutely right. And I would say that Liz Truss was 100% right in pointing out that wokeism is hugely destructive actually for the British economy, for the US economy. A lot of big corporations are driven now by woke ideology and also by an extreme green agenda as well.
Why do you think they are driven by woke ideology? Sorry to interrupt. Like, why do you think that's the case? Do you think maybe it's just the free market, dictating because everyone, can't define what a woman is nowadays, and they might believe in that? Maybe companies see it profitable, or do you think maybe it could be due to like DI legislation, diversity, inclusion, and equity legislation, which is pushing these companies to be like that? Why do you think there is this sudden demand for these sectors to become woke?
Well, I think that what you are seeing with a lot of big corporations on both sides of the Atlantic is you're seeing, I think, a whole sort of woke industry here at work, capturing, in some cases, the leadership upper echelons of these institutions and advancing what would have been described just a few years ago as real far left ideology. In fact, I do view wokeism as far left ideology, and you can see that in corporate boardrooms across the US and the UK, where they're placing far left ideology ahead of the interests of their own shareholders. And clearly, this approach is not actually advancing profit making for these companies. And you look at some big US corporations that have advanced the transgender agenda recently, and they've suffered major losses because the American public does not want to see transgender ideology, placed into the selling of the products that they're buying. And so there's a big backlash against this. And I do see wokeism as fundamentally dangerous, really, because it is based upon identity politics. It's very racially divisive, and it is a million miles away from the thinking of Martin Luther King Jr. And I think that also, wokeism advances as well a very, very radical extremist pro-transgender ideology, which is deeply out of touch with what the vast majority of people think. And if you have politicians or heads of companies who cannot even define what a woman is, this is practically the end of our civilization, isn't it? If we allow this kind of complete insanity to prevail, and this kind of thinking, I think, is so absolutely dangerous to our to our society. And our enemies, of course, are relishing this. And, the Chinese, for example, the Russians, do their best to actually try and promote these divisions within Western society. Um, the Chinese, for example, constantly attack the United States as a racist country. They actively back sort of far left ideology within Western society in order to destroy it, actually. And so they actively encourage, uh, in many respects, the kind of wokeism that is destroying Western society. In fact, and while of course they would never allow it in their own countries, but they foster and fuel far left thinking within the West. And if you look at woke ideology, it is very much driven by Marxist ideology and thinking. Um, One could say that it has strong roots in Maoist thinking in China, for example. Wokeist thinking is deeply intolerant. It is the kind of thinking that attempts to suppress freedom of speech and thought. It is truly Orwellian in every respect. And so I'm very glad that Liz Truss in Washington this week stood up to woke ideology. And the message is we have to defeat it. If we don't defeat it, then our civilization, I think, is fundamentally going to be eroded. And we also, of course, and this is critically important, we have to protect and defend the rights of women and their safety. And that the transgender ideology, as we saw in Scotland under Nicola Sturgeon, is so incredibly dangerous, I think, for the safety of women. It is anti-women, and it is also extremely misogynistic in every respect. And my former boss, Margaret Thatcher, would have mightily stood up to the woke left-wing ideology. She would have fought it, and she would have viewed it as a threat to Western civilization, and she would have emphatically defeated it. And we've got to do the same today. It's poisonous. It is incredibly destructive. It has no place, I think, in our free Western society. I mean, this is incredibly destructive Marxist ideology here. Let's stand up to it, fight it. I do think the British government is making a lot of effort on this front. More needs to be done. But what Liz Truss was saying in Washington this week was absolutely right. Let's stand up to woke ideology and let's win.
How do you think we stand up to woke ideology while still being champions of freedom and the free market? Because I see a lot of solutions would probably be like Ron DeSantis, for example, in the US, even though as conservatives we agree with the problem, which is trans ideology, the solution might be a bit different.
Yeah, so I think, with regard to the legislation that Ron DeSantis is bringing in, and which is similar to legislation that many conservative governments across the United States are introducing, this relates to ensuring that, where there is state funding, government money, public money used, that this will never be used to advance woke ideology and its nefarious agenda. And so this is important to note here, that conservatives firmly believe that there should be no public funds used by the left to advance their destructive ideology. And so this is at the heart of what Florida is doing, and so many states in the United States are moving in this direction. It's also a key issue here of protecting the safety of women and protecting the safety of children, and also ensuring that there is no political indoctrination at all in public schools or universities. And so, my view, what we're seeing in Florida, this is common sense legislation, I think, which supported by the vast majority of people of Florida. After all, DeSantis won a 20% by a 20% margin in Florida, an extremely impressive victory here on a clear platform of advancing economic freedom and growth, but also defeating the woke ideology. And the vast majority of Floridians support this approach. And it is based on the view that you cannot allow public institutions to be hijacked by by the left for nefarious purposes of political indoctrination. And you cannot allow the use of public funds to advance this extreme woke ideology. And so 3 cheers for Ron DeSantis for standing up for the people of Florida, for standing up to the woke mob. And I'm sure that many other governors across the United States will be following DeSantis's lead. And I'm sure that in Britain as well, it's only a matter of time before similar legislation is introduced in the United Kingdom. I think the British policymakers are looking closely at what's happening in Florida. And I think it's an inspiration and a good example for not only for the United States, but also the United Kingdom as well.
Have you got what it takes to be a reasoned presenter? Well, send us a short clip of yourself to join@reasoned.uk and we might be seeing you on this very channel very soon indeed.